Jayne Mansfield was often dismissed as a dumb, blonde bombshell of the 1950s, but behind the peroxide hair and publicity stunts was a surprisingly multifaceted woman. Over the years, many anecdotes about Mansfield have circulated that sound too wild or too ironic to be true. Yet a number of these myths are surprisingly accurate. Number 10. She was a classically trained violinist and pianist. It might sound like studio PR spin, but Jayne Mansfield truly was a classically trained musician. Long before she became a Hollywood sex symbol, Mansfield spent years honing her skills on the violin and piano. In fact, as a child and teenager, she took extensive piano and violin lessons, and excelled at them. Her talent wasn't just a private hobby, either. Mansfield occasionally showcased her musical prowess publicly, defying the dumb blonde stereotype. A famous example came in May 1957, when she appeared on The Ed Sullivan Show and performed a Vivaldi violin concerto live on air, dressed in a glamorous evening gown while expertly playing a challenging classical piece. Reviews at the time noted the novelty of a Hollywood bombshell sawing away at a violin. The New York Times, albeit in a somewhat backhanded compliment, described the performance as a reading of 30-odd poems in a husky, urban, baby voice, adding that while Mansfield had her charms, reading poetry is not one of them. Still, there's no denying she had genuine musical ability. Behind the scenes, Jayne Mansfield was far more than just a pretty face. She was a trained musician with a lifelong love of classical music. Number 9. Her famous pink palace had a heart-shaped bathtub lined with fur. If you thought Liberace had outrageous home decor, wait until you hear about Jayne Mansfield's pink palace. This Hollywood mansion became the stuff of legend thanks to Mansfield's over-the-top interior design, including the heart-shaped bathtub lined with fur. It sounds like a campy myth, something tabloids would invent, but it's completely true. In 1957, Mansfield bought a 40-room Mediterranean-style mansion in Los Angeles and promptly plastered it in pink. She had the whole house painted a cotton candy pink and filled it with cupids, plush carpets, and yes, pink fur everywhere, even in the bathrooms. The most famous fixture was a bathtub she installed in the shape of a heart. According to accounts, the tub was pink and surrounded by pink shag carpeting and fur trim for a truly luxe, if kitschy, bathing experience. Mansfield herself gleefully dubbed the home her Pink Palace, and it indeed became a Hollywood landmark of excess. Photographs from the era show Jayne soaking in a heart-shaped tub, bubbles covering her and fur decor lining the edges. One description from a contemporary source notes the bathtub was monogrammed and adorned with gilded swan faucets, truly making it look like something out of a fantasy. She even had a fountain on the property that spouted pink champagne instead of water, just to drive home the theme. Her then-husband Mickey Hargitay, a bodybuilder handyman, built her a matching heart-shaped swimming pool on the estate grounds, complete with the words, "I love you, Janie," spelled out in gold mosaic at the bottom. In other words, nothing was too extravagant or too pink for Mansfield's tastes. Number 8. She was genuinely fluent in 5 languages. It's hard to imagine the giggling blonde bombshell conversing in foreign tongues, but Mansfield was brainy behind the scenes. She prided herself on her intellect, even claiming a high IQ of 163, and part of that genius was an aptitude for languages. By the late 1950s, Mansfield could speak English, her native language of course, plus 4 others, French, Spanish, German, and Italian. Some sources even say she picked up Hungarian phrases from her second husband, Mickey Hargitay, who was Hungarian-born, though her truly fluent languages were the Western European ones. This wasn't just a party trick. Jayne had studied languages in school and continued to practice them in her adult life. According to biographical details, Mansfield learned French, Spanish, and German in high school, then later studied Italian in 1963. She loved to boast about this in interviews, partially to combat the dumb blonde image that frustrated her. And indeed, journalists of the era sometimes referred to her as Hollywood's smartest dumb blonde for that very reason. It's as if the public couldn't reconcile her curvy, playful image with the fact that she could read Goethe or Molière in the original language. Mansfield herself lamented that people didn't care about her brain. "They're more interested in 40-21-35, she quipped, referencing her famous hourglass measurements. Number 7. She had a documented friendship with Anton LaVey. and was a priestess in the Church of Satan. It sounds like pure tabloid fodder, a 1950s sex symbol mixed up with a satanic high priest? But incredibly, this is true. Mansfield not only met LaVey, but was given an honorary title in his church. The encounter took place in 1966 in San Francisco. Jayne was in town for the film festival with her then-boyfriend and lawyer, Sam Brody, and she was intrigued by the growing notoriety of LaVey's Church of Satan. So she arranged a meeting with LaVey at his Black House. According to press coverage at the time, LaVey was enchanted with the starlet and awarded Mansfield a medallion and the title High Priestess of San Francisco's Church of Satan. In other words, he made her an honorary priestess on the spot, complete with a certificate and photo ops. The media had an absolute field day with this. Suddenly, Jayne Mansfield was being labeled a Satanist in newspapers, which only added to her lurid reputation. Photographs from that meeting show Jayne in a form-fitting black dress, and LaVey in his dark cape and horns, standing together over a ceremonial altar, an image sure to get tongues wagging. The press speculated that perhaps Mansfield was romantically involved with LaVey, a claim her friends denied, but which LaVey's camp loved to hint at. In a 1992 interview, LaVey's own daughter Carla even asserted that Jayne was a practicing LaVeyan Satanist and did have a romantic affair with her father. That part remains unconfirmed gossip, but it shows how much this story has lived on in pop culture. In fact, an entire documentary film, Mansfield 66 to 67, was made exploring Mansfield's dalliance with Satanism and the urban legend that LaVey cursed Jayne's boyfriend, Brody, shortly before their fatal car crash. What's undeniable is that the friendship, or at least association, between Jayne Mansfield and Anton LaVey really happened and was well documented. Jayne herself seemed amused by it and likely saw it as just another over-the-top publicity stunt to keep her name in the papers, which it certainly did. She never publicly repudiated the Satanist title, nor did she become a devoted member. She didn't attend rituals regularly or anything. But the High Priestess designation stuck in people's minds. Number 6, she really did suffer a wardrobe malfunction to upstage Sophia Loren. One of the most legendary Hollywood photos of the 1950s shows Italian actress Sophia Loren casting a side eye at Jayne Mansfield's overflowing décolletage at a dinner party. The image, often captioned as Sophia glaring at Jayne's wardrobe malfunction, has fueled decades of rumors. Did Mansfield deliberately expose herself to steal the spotlight from Loren? According to both women, yes, that incident really happened just as we imagine. In 1957, Paramount threw a fancy welcome party for Sophia Loren, who was new to Hollywood at the time. All the biggest names were there, and Jayne Mansfield decided to make a grand, scene-stealing entrance. She arrived last, plunging neckline on full display, and sat right next to Sophia Loren at the table. As Mansfield leaned over to talk, her dress slipped, or perhaps was maneuvered, such that her bust nearly spilled out, exposing much more than was common in polite company. Cameras flashed. The photographers couldn't get enough of the busty blonde, literally upstaging the demure Italian star. The most famous photo captures Loren looking askance at Mansfield's chest, and for years, people interpreted Sophia's expression as jealousy or annoyance. Only much later did Sophia Loren clarify what was going through her mind. All of cinema was there. It was incredible. And then comes in Jayne Mansfield, the last one to come, Loren recalled. She came right for my table. She knew everyone was watching. She sat down. And now she was barely, listen. Look at the picture. Where are my eyes? I'm staring at her nipples because I am afraid they are about to come onto my plate. In my face you can see the fear. I'm so frightened that everything in her dress is going to blow, boom, and spill all over the table. Loren even said she refused to autograph that infamous photo out of respect for Mansfield, who died a decade later. Number 5. Her death car was sold and became a ghoulish roadside attraction. After Jayne Mansfield's tragic death in a 1967 car accident, many morbid rumors spread about the fate of the wrecked vehicle. One particularly creepy tale claimed that the crushed car was put on display as a roadside attraction. It sounds like something out of a horror flick, a carnival showman charging people to see the mangled death car. But this one is morbidly true. Mansfield was killed when her 1966 Buick Electra 225 plowed under the rear of a tractor trailer, shearing the top of the car off. The vehicle was essentially totaled, but it wasn't simply scrapped. A private collector in Florida bought the wreckage. By the early 1970s, that collector, or a subsequent owner, had realized there was an audience for macabre celebrity relics. The Buick was put on display in Florida as a roadside museum piece, billed as Jayne Mansfield's death car. For years, tourists could actually pay to view the twisted gray car, complete with its shattered windshield and caved-in roof. It toured various venues and eventually became a fixture at a place called the Tragedy and U.S. History Museum in St. Augustine, Florida. Next to other grisly exhibits like the death cars of Bonnie and Clyde, Mansfield's Buick drew the morbidly curious. As one write-up notes, by the 1970s the death car had become a roadside attraction. This traveling curio show kept alive the ghoulish interest in Mansfield's death. People even spread false rumors that she had been decapitated in the crash. She wasn't. That myth started because photos showed her wig thrown from the car, which bystanders mistook for her scalp. Ultimately, the original wreckage made its way to Los Angeles. In the 2000s, it was owned by Scott Michaels, who displayed it at his dearly departed Tours and Museum in Hollywood. Visitors could once again gape at the dented, rusted Buick that carried Mansfield to her untimely end. Number 4. She was nearly broke at the time of her death. Jayne Mansfield lived lavishly. Mansions, sports cars, endless parties. So one might assume she was financially set. Shockingly, by the time of her death in 1967, Mansfield's finances were in shambles. The myth that she was nearly broke or even in debt when she died is sadly true. Despite years of film salaries, nightclub earnings, and publicity fees, Jayne's estate was essentially insolvent. There were several reasons. She had an extravagant lifestyle, supporting a large household, including her 5 children, and spending freely on luxuries like the Pink Palace decor. She also wasn't landing major film roles in the mid-60s, so her income had dipped while her spending remained high. When her estate was appraised after her death, it was valued at around $600,000. Not bad on the surface, but against that were massive debts. Court documents later revealed that Mansfield owed a staggering $500,000 in various liabilities. In today's dollars, that's the equivalent of a few million. She owed money on her home, had unpaid taxes and bills, and even had tabs for things like $11,000 worth of lingerie. She had a known shopping habit for fancy undergarments. There was also a bill for the plumbing installation of her heart-shaped pool, over $11,000. That was outstanding. All told, Mansfield's estate could not cover its debts, meaning she died effectively bankrupt. Her 4 eldest children had to go to court in 1977 to sort out the mess and try to manage what little was left. Mickey Hargitay, her ex-husband, even sued the estate for child support, arrears, and expenses for raising the kids, but he lost, because there was basically nothing to get. It's a rather poignant end for someone who once earned thousands a week in her heyday. By 1967, Jayne was taking whatever gigs she could, low-budget stage shows, B-movies in Europe, to stay afloat. Friends noted she was cutting back and worried about money. She reportedly had less than a few $100s in her checking account at times near the end. Number 3. She was the first major American actress to appear nude in a leading role. In 1963, she shattered a big Hollywood taboo. Mansfield became the first mainstream American actress to do a nude scene in a major motion picture. The film was Promises, Promises, a racy comedy in which Jayne, then a well-known star, appeared topless on screen. At the time, the Hollywood production code was crumbling, but still technically in effect, and no high-profile American actress had ever bared it all in a sound film. Mansfield changed that. She filmed multiple nude scenes for Promises, Promises. The movie's plot, fittingly, is about couples experimenting on a yacht, and the resulting images caused an uproar. When word got out, censorship boards in some cities banned the movie, and Playboy published stills from the set as a huge scoop, which even got Hugh Hefner arrested on obscenity charges for a short time. The publicity around Promises, Promises touted it as the nudist Jayne Mansfield yet. It indeed delivered on that promise. Audiences in places where it screened got to see a bona fide Hollywood sex symbol in the buff, something unheard of before. As a result, Mansfield secured a peculiar place in film history. To quote one retrospective, Promises made Mansfield one of the first major American actresses to perform a nude scene in a post-silent era film. Another source flat out calls her the first mainstream American actress to appear nude in a starring role. This was a bold move in 1963, predating the late 60s wave of more explicit films. In fact, Promises was so controversial, it was barred in some markets, Cleveland, for example, and only did well at the box office in places where curious crowds could see it. Number 2, she owned a menagerie of over 40 animals. If you visited Jayne Mansfield's home during her heyday, you might think you'd wandered into a zoo. Stories of her menagerie of pets are not exaggerated. At one point, she was caring for dozens of animals, reportedly over 40 in total. Mansfield absolutely adored animals and was known for surrounding herself with furry and feathered friends. Her favorite pets were her Chihuahua dogs. She always had a pack of little Chihuahuas underfoot, often with cutesy names. In fact, toward the end of her life, she added 2 more Chihuahuas to her collection and named them hilariously Momsicle and Popsicle. But Chihuahuas were just the tip of the iceberg. Jayne's pink mansion was also home to cats, dogs of other breeds, birds, and even more exotic critters. A contemporary account from her early Hollywood years noted that in a modest apartment, Jayne and her first husband lived with a Great Dane, 3 cats named Sabina, Romulus, and Ophelia, 2 Chihuahuas, a poodle dyed pink, and a rabbit, all at the same time. And that was before she even bought the Pink Palace. As her fortunes rose, so did the pet count. Mansfield had a soft spot for animals in need and would impulsively adopt creatures. Over the years, she accumulated parrots, a chimpanzee, some sources mention she briefly had a pet chimp, and allegedly even a small ocelot or cheetah cub gifted to her, though that might have been a publicity stunt photo. At minimum, the core menagerie included around a dozen dogs, several cats, a few birds, and the oddball others. Add them up over time, and the number easily exceeds 40 individual animals that she owned or cared for through her life. Number 1. She was a published poet. Amid all the sensational aspects of Jayne Mansfield's life, it often gets forgotten that she had a creative, introspective side as well. Surprisingly, Jayne wrote poetry, and even had some of her poems published. Calling her a published poet might raise eyebrows, but this myth has a kernel of truth. While Mansfield never released a full poetry anthology, or anything of that sort, she did on occasion pen poems and see them in print. For instance, during her school days and early career, Jayne scribbled verses and musings. A few of her poems were reportedly printed in local newspapers and fan magazines, showcasing a very different talent than the one she displayed on screen. These weren't world-changing literary works, but they revealed Jayne's thoughtful side that she rarely got to show the public. One example of Mansfield's poetic inclination can be seen in her 1964 album, Shakespeare, Tchaikovsky and Me, where she recited classic poems by Shakespeare, Browning, and others against classical music. While those were not her own writings, Jayne's choice to undertake such a project stemmed from her genuine love of literature and poetry. She wanted to be taken seriously as more than a pin-up, and this record was a passion project that let her engage with poetry, albeit in a sultry, breathy reading style. A reviewer at the time snarked that reading poetry wasn't her strongest suit, but she certainly gave it a shot. More pertinently, Mansfield co-wrote an autobiographical book, Jayne Mansfield's Wild, Wild World, in 1963, which, while mostly prose, included her reflections and could be considered a form of creative expression. Some of her short poems or poetic one-liners made their way into interviews in that book, effectively publishing her written words to the world. Beyond that, accounts from friends and family suggest Jayne kept journals where she'd jot down poems, a few of which were shared after her death. For example, one gentle poem she wrote about motherhood and fame was published in a magazine memorial piece after the 1967 accident, showing a surprisingly introspective side of Jayne. She mused about the fleeting nature of fame and the genuine love she had for her children, quite poignant and definitely poetic. Though Mansfield will never be remembered first and foremost as a poet, the fact remains that she did write creatively and sought to share that with others. In a way, her entire life was a form of performance art and self-expression, so it's not shocking that she dabbled in poetry.